If you're in search of some better airflow for your 2012 to 2015 4.0 liter Toyota Tacoma, this S&B Cold Air Intake with the Oiled Cleanable Cotton Filter will be a great kit to take a look into. Now this will get rid of most of the restriction that your factory airbox had, upping the performance, offering better airflow to increase efficiency, and getting a decent amount of horsepower and torque for an intake system. Now this choice will also be a great option for the Tacoma owner who wants a little more protection to the filter inside of their engine bay compared to some other heat shield options, especially if they're taking their truck off-road. Now not only will this perform well, but it's also going to give the truck a sporty look for the inside of the engine bay whenever you pop the hood, and a better sound to your motor. Getting into the construction, as you can see, this will have a large straight-through style intake tube and will be a lot larger than your factory one, streamlining all of that airflow. This also will come with a large enclosed box or an airbox design to protect the filter, and also has a clear lid for the top so you can keep an eye on your filter for whenever you have to clean it, and of course give a sporty look with the red filter. Now speaking of the filter, this will be a large 8-layer oiled cotton filter that will have a 65% airflow improvement over your stock element, will offer better filtration, and you will be able to clean it instead of replacing it after so many miles like the factory one. Not to mention, this will offer silicone seals that are heat resistant up to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, and everything else that you need in order to install this on your truck. Now when it comes to price, this kit will come in at right around the $400 mark, and for what you're getting, I think that is a pretty fair price. And what I will say is that you're getting excellent quality with the durable materials that you can count on while getting some solid gains. Now others available on the page may not come with all of the bells and whistles that you see here, like the airbox design, the clear lid on top, or even an oiled filter that will offer a little bit more airflow than a dry filter. Now I think if you have the cash to spend on a high quality system to get the most out of your intake, then this is a great choice. Now install will be a 1 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter, taking you roughly an hour to get the job done with some basic hand tools. At this point we can head over to the shop to check out a detailed breakdown of what that install looks like. So that's going to wrap it up for me. Let's jump into it.
The tools you're going to need for this installation include a ratchet, regular or electric, 8, 10, 12 millimeter sockets, a socket extension, 10 millimeter wrench, Phillips head screwdriver, a trim removal tool, needle nose pliers, and optionally soapy water. How's it going, everybody? Today we have a cold air intake that we're installing on our Tacoma, and we're going to get started with the uninstall under the hood. So let's go. We're going to start by disconnecting our negative battery terminal using our 10 millimeter socket. And we're going to remove it and tuck it out of the way. Next, we're going to take off the engine cover by removing the 2 10 millimeter bolts on top. With the engine cover removed, we can now disconnect and remove the mass airflow sensor connector from the airbox. First, we're going to push in this tab and pull straight back to remove the connector. Then we're going to use our trim removal tool to take the Christmas tree out of the airbox. Now we're going to loosen up the throttle body hose clamp by loosening up this clamp right here with our 10 millimeter socket. And then we're going to take off the breather hose right here with a pair of needle nose pliers to remove this clamp, move that out of the way. With the breather hose out of the way, we now have access to this wire harness push clip here. So we're going to remove that by using our trim removal tool. Now we can remove this airbox screw right here using our 10 millimeter socket and the breather hose that's right behind it. And the hose you can just pull out by hand. Right next to the air intake tube here, we're going to locate our smog pump and we're going to remove the cover here using our trim removal tool. Then we have access to the hose, so we're going to remove that with our needle nose pliers and the electrical connector. Once that's all out of the way, we can actually remove the smog pump with our 10mm socket. To remove the smog pump cover here, there's some tabs around the sides. So we're going to use our hands and our trim removal tool. So you can see where my trim removal tool is going. Right there is where one of the tabs is at. And then on the other side here, right where my middle finger is at, there's a tab down there. So we're going to pry up with both at the same time and alternate, and then just kind of work our way around the cover like so. Get that out of the way. Now we're going to move this clamp out of the way so we can take the hose off. And now we can remove the electrical connector here. And it's a simple push tab release, and it's on the back side here. So just push that in and pull straight up. To get to the smog pump screws, we're first going to remove the other end of the electrical connector here from its bracket using our trim removal tool. All right, with that out of the way, we can get to the 3 screws. We have one right down here, one over here, straight down, and also the third one straight down here. So I'm using my 10mm socket and an extension. With those 3 screws removed, we can now get this smog pump out of here, and then I'll meet you back here so we can remove the air intake tube. For our air intake tube, we're going to loosen up this hose clamp right here using our 10mm socket. Once that's done, then we're going to get our 12mm socket and remove the 2 bolts holding the air intake tube in place. So the one bolt is here and the other bolt is down here. First, let's loosen this clamp with our 10mm socket. And let's switch over to our 12mm socket so we can remove these bolts. With that all taken care of, we can remove the hose from our air box and then take out the whole assembly. At this point, we're going to be relocating our AC lines. So there is going to be a lot of moving and replacing of the brackets. So just bear with me and follow along, and I'll show you how to do it. Here's our AC lines, and these are the brackets that I was speaking about. So we're going to be removing a bunch of these bolts here, and I'll show you how in a second. And also this electrical connector here. So we're going to do that first using our trim removal tool. Just pry it underneath carefully and lift it out of the way. Next, we want our 10mm socket, and we're going to remove this bracket, but first we're going to remove this nut on top. All right, now let's flip this mount out of the way. And we can actually remove it because we will not be reusing this. So you can just kind of pry it open by hand and take it off. Now we can remove this bolt here and pull the bracket out. All right, now that is out of the way, we're gonna move over to this bracket, and the first thing we're gonna do is actually take the bracket off. Just this bolt right here, you can leave this bolt as it is. So just this bolt here. Now you should be able to move this bracket around. And what we're gonna do, same thing as the other one, take this nut off. So, and the reason we're doing this is just so we can relocate these AC lines in order to fit our aftermarket box in its place here. All right, with this bracket removed, we can go ahead and remove this nut. And we're gonna be keeping this rubber spacer here. And hold on to this nut too, as we'll be reusing it. But this bracket, we can get this out of the way. It will not be reused. All right, now that we have our rubber spacer, we're actually gonna put it into this chassis hole right here. And we'll just tighten it down by hand, give it a good snug. And this bracket here with the rubber spacer, we're gonna actually take it off and flip it around. Go, like so. Now we just have to manipulate the AC line just a bit in order to fit this bracket over our rubber mount and stud here. And then we're gonna put the 10mm nut back on top and tighten it down. All right, that takes care of that, and all those other little pieces you can just store in a safe spot. Sticking here in the same spot right by the AC lines, we're moving over to this electrical harness, and there's two push tabs that are holding it in place. So we're gonna take our trim removal tool and remove those. And also on your car, you probably have a little push tab here. It comes out from the bottom, but you have to squeeze it from the top. So you could probably use either your trim removal tool or needle nose pliers to pop that out. But for us, it's not there, so we're gonna move on to these push clips on the wire harness. We have one last bolt to remove from our air box right here, and then we can take this out, put it on the table so we can swap over some parts and start preparation for our new air intake. This bolt is right next to the factory air box filter lid, and we'll be removing it using our 10mm socket. Now we can grab our entire air box here and wiggle it to pop it off of the throttle body and pull it out of the way. Now, before we start installing our new air intake, there are a couple parts that we have to take off of our factory parts and swap over, and then there's gonna be a little preparation work, but I can show you how to do it. So let's get started by removing some parts off of our small pump. All right, so we're gonna need a set of needle nose pliers, and what we're gonna do is take these rubber grommets off of the brackets here, and then also off of the pump, and they'll be transferred over later on during the install. So just grab the tops here and gently pry them away from the brackets. And then do that for all three. All right, once that's free, let's just move our small pump to the side, and we're gonna take them off of this bracket as well. Right, and let's remove the electrical connector from the bracket. So I'm going to use my needle nose pliers, and you kind of see the two tabs here holding this in place. Squeeze those together and push it out. All right, now we can move the bracket to the side. Put these somewhere safe, and we'll move on to the mass airflow sensor. Now we're going to remove the mass airflow sensor right here from our factory air box and set it to the side for now, because we're then going to grab the supplied hardware to put it into our new air intake tube. So we're going to grab a Phillips head screwdriver, take out the two screws here, and then just gently pull it out of our air box. All right, the factory screws you can just get rid of, because we will be using new screws that they have supplied with the kit. But now just gently pull it out. This is fragile, so just keep it somewhere safe for now. And what we have to do is go ahead and grab the supplied gasket and hardware so we can put it into our new intake tube. All right, we're going to install our MAF into our new intake tube now, and then there are a couple other parts that we're going to be installing on the table, but we're going to start here. So grab the MAF sensor that we removed earlier and the supplied hardware. We have an adapter, a gasket, and the two screws, and your Phillips head screwdriver. Let's take the MAF and then put the adapter over top of that first. Make sure that the holes line up. It can only go on one way. Next, let's put on the gasket. There we go. So it goes, this will also only fit on one way. If you notice, if I flip it around, it kind of just doesn't fit over top. So once you have it positioned right, it slides right on. Once we have that together, let's put the screws through and then place it onto our new intake tube. So if they don't line up, just spin it 180 degrees like so. And you'll notice that they line up nicely. Then we can take our Phillips head screwdriver and tighten these screws down. It's a good idea to alternate these as you're tightening them down, as opposed to just tightening one down all the way. And this way you get a nice even compression on the gasket. But once you notice that the gasket has squished a little bit, that should be tight enough. Don't over tighten. Now we're going to be installing our hose coupler here on the throttle body side. So grab that and a clamp along with the vacuum hose barb, which was going to be installing here. And we need an 11mm wrench for this and our 8mm socket to tighten down the clamp. So we're installing the vacuum hose barb right here in this recessed nut next to the MAF sensor. And for this barb, just be very careful tightening it down because it is plastic going into metal. So you always got to be careful when plastic is involved with metal. But what you want to do is just tighten it down by hand as much as possible. Then grab your 11mm wrench and just give it another half turn. Now we can get our coupler and clamp. Slide the clamp over the coupler and then everything over our intake tube. And there's a nice, it's very easy to see line there where the clamp is supposed to go till, or the coupler, excuse me. So once it's seated properly, take your 8mm socket and loosely tighten down this clamp. Now we have our intake box here, and we're going to grab the fender seal and the intake tube seal, and we're going to install these so that we can get ready to put this in the car. Okay, once that's seated properly, we can turn this around and this is where our air intake seal will go. And you want to install it with the letters and words facing out. So the seal is slotted so it goes into the edge of the box. So the edge will go actually in the middle of the groove of the seal. So just got to kind of slowly work it around by hand. And then just make sure that it is properly seated inside and out. Go. All right, looks good. We're back inside the engine bay and we're going to install these 3 supplied brackets. They all go right around the power steering reservoir here, and we're going to use a combination of factory and supplied bolts along with our 10mm socket and wrench. All right, so our longest bracket right here is going to go in front of the power steering reservoir. So we're going to take out this bolt right here, slide this bracket underneath the power steering reservoir bracket, and tighten that bolt back down. So I'm using my extension and my 10mm socket to remove that bolt. Now we're going to slide this bracket underneath, line up the holes, and put our bolt back through. Now we can tighten it back down. And we're going to leave all these brackets loose after we install them, just so that we have room for adjustment in a later step. So we can move on to the medium-sized one. This is not the shortest one, but it's not the longest one, obviously. So this one's going to go right here behind the power steering fluid reservoir, and we're going to secure it down using this bolt hole and the bolt that we removed from it earlier. So I'll show you that. This bolt looks like this. This is the one that was holding our factory air intake tube in place. Again, just keep it loose for now, but tighten it down a little bit. Okay, and we're gonna switch angles here so we can show you the last bracket, but it is gonna go right here on the rad support. For our last bracket, the smallest one, we're going to use the supplied hardware here, a bolt, 2 flat washers, and a nylon locking nut. And we're going to tighten those down using our 10mm socket and 10mm wrench. So we're going to mount this right here in this hole in the rad support. So we're going to line up the hole with our bracket, and I'm putting the bolt with a washer on it through the back, and then I'm going to put a washer on the front and then the locking nut. Now we want to keep this as horizontal as possible while we're tightening it, because it is going to be relatively close to that position when we mount up our small pump. We're getting ready to reinstall our smog pump on the brackets that we just installed. So we're going to need the grommets, the supplied wire extension, the smog pump itself, and the cover. So I'll show you how to get this done, starting with the grommets. Let's reinstall the grommets in each of our brackets with the bigger end up. Next, let's grab our wire extension, connect that, and route it behind our washer fluid reservoir. So it is keyed and it will only go in one way. Give it a good push, you should hear an audible click. We know we're connected properly, and we're gonna go ahead and route this right behind our washer fluid reservoir. And we're gonna bring it out right by the brackets here. Right next, let's grab our smog pump. Now we're going to fit this onto the grommets, and it's gonna be facing in this direction. So it's gonna go right here in this little hole in front of the power steering reservoir. So you're gonna have to maneuver your brackets around to line them all up properly. So just slip the grommets into the mounting points on the smog pump. All right, once we have our smog pump mounted, we can go ahead and connect the harness extension to the connector. So I'm gonna route the factory harness up underneath the brackets and connect it right behind, or actually right in front of our washer fluid reservoir. All right, at this point, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and when you have it positioned properly, you can tighten down the brackets. All right, as I was saying, it's a good point now to tighten down our brackets the rest of the way. Then we're gonna reconnect our smog pump hose, make sure there's no kinks in it, and then we're gonna put our lid on. All right, now that our brackets are tightened, go ahead and grab our smog pump hose. Make sure that there's no kinks in it, so we can rotate around in order to connect it. We can put the clamp back over top and put our lid on. We're ready to put in our aftermarket air box, and the small hole here is going to go towards the fender. Make sure it sits in there nice and flat, and you should be able to see the holes are lined up. So now we're going to grab our hardware and mount it down. All right, to mount this box in place, we're using 2 of the factory bolts. This is a 12mm bolt that came out of the smog pump brackets. So we're reusing this one. And that's a threaded hole that we're using there. However, this other hole down here to mount this box is unthreaded. So what we're gonna do is use one of our 10mm factory bolts, put it through the hole, and then if you reach underneath the fender, you can access the bolt. And we're gonna use the supplied nylon locking nut. And the nut is a 10mm as well. Right, now we can go ahead and tighten down this one with the excuse me, with our 12mm socket. And the other one we're tightening down with our 10mm socket and 10mm wrench. Now we're gonna go ahead and put in our air intake tube here. It's a good idea to spray a little bit of soapy water around the rim of this here. This end is gonna go into the rubber gasket that's in our air box, and then this end is gonna go towards the throttle body. So when you're fitting this into the air box, you're gonna have to maneuver it around a little bit, but also be mindful of our plastic vacuum barb here. Don't wanna bang that off anything because it is fragile. All right, once you get this all the way seated inside the air box, go ahead and take the breather hose here and put that on the air intake tube right here. Put our clamp back on. And go ahead and hook in our MAF connector as well. Gonna route it underneath the hose here. And now we're gonna get our extended vacuum line and attach it to our fuel regulator, which is at the end of the fuel rail here, and hook it up to our airbox vacuum. All right, we've got our extended vacuum line here, and we're gonna take this one off of our fuel pressure regulator here. So if you follow the fuel line or the fuel rail all the way down, you'll find that vacuum hose. So remove that completely, put in our extended one that is supplied with the kit, and then put it on the vacuum barb, which is on our air intake here. All right, once you have that all seated properly, we can move on, grab our air filter and put that in next. All right, it's time to put in our air filter. So grab that, make sure that the clamp is on it, and grab your 8mm socket. All right, so this filter is oversized, so we're gonna put the small end in first. And we just gotta kind of twist it around in order to maneuver it inside the box. Flip it so that we can slip it onto our intake tube. Makes it a little easier to put the bottom on first. And if your clamp is too tight, you might have to loosen it up so you can slide it on. There we go. All right. And once it's fully seated, go ahead and tighten it back down. Just give it a little wiggle, make sure it's on there good. All right, and since we're right here, we're gonna go ahead and put on our clear lid with the logo on it. There we go. Looks like it only goes on in one direction, and it makes sense since the logo is pointing in the right direction. And to secure this down, we're gonna use the supplied hardware here. Got Phillips head button head bolts and plastic washers. So let's slip those, plastic or rubber washers if you will. Slip those over and thread them in by hand, and then we'll tighten them down with our Phillips head screwdriver. All right, we got our other clamp here and our 8mm socket. We're gonna go ahead and put this on our coupler and throw that over our throttle body and tighten it down. I like to put these on afterwards just so they don't fall off, so we don't lose them. But you could have put this on prior step, but I like to be safe. But now that we have it over our coupler here, just have to wiggle this around in order to get the rubber around our throttle body. There we go. You just have to wiggle around, pull it on enough that it's seated here. There we go. And we put our clamp on in position. And we're going to tighten it down with our 8mm socket. Gonna make sure it's seated all the way. There we go. Now we're gonna reinstall our engine cover. So grab that, your 10mm socket, and some factory hardware. One of the nuts from the removal process of this we're gonna use, but then for the other side, we're gonna use this 10mm bolt, which we removed from the smog pump. All right, make sure the tabs in the back here go around those rubber mounting points. Then you just kind of have to move your MAF wire around. Make sure that the stud goes through the engine cover over here. And then you should be able to line up this bolt here, right here, which is on the air intake tube. So this is where we're putting our 10mm bolt that we removed from our smog pump. And we're replacing the nut that came off of our engine cover during removal. Moving right on over to the battery, and go ahead and reconnect our negative battery terminal right now. And this gets tightened down with a 10mm socket. That's going to wrap up this review and install of the S&B Cold Air Intake with Oiled Cleanable Cotton Filter for the 12 to 15 4-liter Tacoma. Thank you for watching, and for all things Tacoma, keep it right here at extremeterrain.com.